In 1933, Fred Bear created a legacy, pursuing his lifelong passion. Fred's mission was to ensure archery remains accessible to everyone. Here at Bear Archery, we promise to never forget the principles our brands were founded on. From the youngest archer to the oldest, we strive to build bows that give you the best shooting experience. Visit beararchery.com to discover more.
The only shooting stick with one-handed trigger pull adjustments has a new way to keep you at the top of your game. The Trigger Stick Apex. Built for sturdy support that adapts to unforgiving terrain with easy adjustments to make your big shots. With our DuraSteady 3-piece carbon leg design and interchangeable rock-solid clamp, nothing tops the Apex. The Trigger Stick Apex, only from Primrose.
Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. This is the 247th episode of the podcast, and today we're going to be talking about ruts, what they are, and how you might get out of them when it comes to fly fishing or angling in general. But before we get to that, this is the 247th episode of the podcast, and we're coming up on the 250th, actually 251st, because there's something special for the 250th. But the 251st, I'll have another Fly Fishing Accusations podcast with an opportunity for you to ask questions or offer feedback. I've got some great emails that I have received from listeners and readers over the last few weeks that I would gladly share on that episode. But if you have something that you want to bring up, there's a very good chance that you might make it into the episode as well. So don't hesitate to reach out, Matthew at castingacross.com, Matthew at castingacross.com, and I'm always happy to interact with you and your questions, your comments, your feedback. So, as I mentioned, I want to talk about ruts. So, what is a rut? Well, I don't know if you experienced this, and there's a very good chance you haven't experienced this. Maybe you are completely content in your fly fishing, and you are just chomping at the bit every morning when you wake up to get out and hit the river, hit the surf, hit the lake, do whatever you need to do to get out and get on the water. But the reality is that for a lot of us, there's moments of doldrum. There's moments of feeling like you are stuck. There's moments of feeling like this isn't as exciting as I remember it being when I started or even at the beginning of the season, and it might cause you to put down your fly rod. So here's my first piece of advice. This is maybe counterintuitive. This might be the last thing that you want to hear, but it's perfectly fine to take a break from fly fishing. It's perfectly fine to take a break from fly fishing. Now, you don't need me to tell you that. I don't need to validate you on your break that you're taking from going fishing, but I've found that there's actually been times in my life, even very, very recently, where I've really come to appreciate taking breaks from fly fishing. Now, I'm always involved in one way, shape, or form because of casting across and because my boys are into it, and it's never longer than a month. But in the last few years, as I've taken up waterfowl hunting, I have found that prime time of waterfowl hunting, when the birds are really moving and there's a lot of them around and the weather is nice, I want to spend every minute I can out on the water chasing birds. And so that means that the fly rods probably are going to stay in the back of the car and maybe not even make it there. They might stay in the basement. But that's totally fine. I'm choosing something good. It's not that I am choosing to put down fly fishing because I don't enjoy it. It's because I have found something else that is in that moment, for that period of time, a higher priority for me. But of course, if something were to happen, if someone were to say, "Hey, I want to go fishing in this spot," or where I was take a vacation or a trip, and I'd be on a river or near a river, then I wouldn't say no. I've said I'm not going to fish for this month. That's not at all the situation. But all that to say is that there is a significant renewed desire to hit the water as soon as that month is kind of drawing to a close, or those 3 weeks or whatever it might be. I really want to get back out there. And so that is a way to kind of kickstart your appreciation for fly fishing. Just put it down for a little bit. And I would say that doesn't mean that you have to put down fishing. Put down fly fishing. You can pick up the spinning rod. You can pick up the bait caster. You can go out with the surf rod. You can can do anything like that. You can do other outdoor activities. And this is something that I've talked about ad nauseum. And that is the benefit of diversifying your outdoor experience. I think I have a podcast or an article with that exact name on there. But that means that you can go hiking, you can go bird watching, you can go kayaking, and you don't need to bring a fly rod along. And there's a myriad of benefits that come with that. You are so much more observational, at least in different ways. So let me walk that back. It's not that you are more observational when you don't have a fly rod. It's just that you're observational in different ways. You're seeing things in new and different ways. So go back to the duck hunting, for example. When I am hunting in some of the very same waterways that I fish in the spring and summer and early fall, when I'm there hunting in the late fall, I'm noticing things about the water. I'm noticing contours in the river bottom. I'm noticing places where there are flows from tributaries and things like that that I just don't normally notice. Now, does that mean that I am super distracted when I'm fishing? No, it just means that I have a bunch of other stimuli that I am paying attention to and trying to process. And so, in a different situation, a different circumstance, I'm noticing new and different things. So, that is it doesn't mean that you use those diverse outdoor experiences in a negative sense. It just means that in those moments, there are auxiliary benefits that you can bring back into your fly fishing. And so, that means that when you're out with the kids, when you're out with friends, when you're out just doing something other than fly fishing, there's ways that you can take that and you can bring it back in to your time on the water. So when you take a break, when you put the rod down for a week or a couple weeks or even a month, it doesn't mean that you are putting things down and that there's no benefit. There may be very well some incredibly good benefits that you are going to be gleaning from doing that. And there's probably other times that are worth doing this. If you live in an area where where the temperatures get really hot in the summer and the trout are stressed, they're still going to live there. So it's not put and take fisheries. They're wild fish. But because of seasonal temperatures, or even just the way that that summer is going, that it would be wiser to not stress those fish out, then that would be a great reason to do it. You don't feel like, I'm not a real fly fisher. I'm losing my angling card if I'm putting my rod down for the month of July. No, that's a perfectly valid reason to not fish, because it is not the wisest thing to do. It's not the kind of environmental stewardship that you want to practice. So I would say that is my first and most basic suggestion to getting out of a fly fishing rut. If you're feeling like you're doing the same thing over and over again, or you're feeling like you're not having as good of a time, or even if you're not having the kind of productivity that you would like to have, it doesn't mean that you need to force it. It doesn't need to keep pushing through. Just give it a break, give it a rest, give it a breather. Another analogy I like to use with this, for lots of parts of life, it has to do with video games. So I don't think I've ever talked about video games on the podcast, but I played a lot of video games as a kid, and my boys play quite a few these days when we are not outside. But there's times where you get to a difficult situation, and you get to the point where you're staring at the TV screen, and your thumbs are getting tired, so your eyes are tired, your thumbs are tired, you're getting frustrated, and it's a relatively simple thing, but the time that you are getting to that puzzle or getting to that challenge or whatever it might be in the video game has gotten you to the point where you are physically and mentally just unable to deal with something that you should normally deal with. And so to put it down, give it a few hours, wait a couple days, nothing wrong with that, come back to it, and lo and behold, first time out, you achieve that challenge, you beat that boss, you solve that puzzle, you make it through that dungeon. All right. Now, what does that show? It shows us that that our experiences can take a toll on us. Something pleasurable, something fun can take a toll on us. The same thing is true in fly fishing. If you're not having the kind of success that you're having, you don't need to press through and just dig deep and make it happen. There's a very good chance, if you're listening to this podcast, you are not vocationally engaged in catching fish. You're doing it for pleasure. And so that means that you can put it down, take a breather, come back a few days and maybe a week later. Actually, one more thing I'll add to that. I've had that happen before with a particular fish that I'm fishing for. And some of it has to do with the fish needs time, but some of it is that I need to just breathe, and I need to not press, and I need to not try to catch this particular fish. There was years where I was on the water 5 or 6 days a week, and there'd be particular fish that I'd be trying to kind of solve that puzzle. And I just couldn't come back to that fish multiple times a day or even the next day after I fished to it and be successful. So I just have to take that breather, think about it, anticipate making a measured and informed approach and presentation. So putting my gear down broke me out of that rut that was not helpful for catching fish, and it made things a little bit less fun. So that's the first thing. All right, the first thing is just put it down for a period of time. And that's super subjective. And after a few weeks, if you have this intense longing for going fishing, then go fishing, right? All right, first thing. Second thing, switch up your gear. Switch up your gear. So if you feel like you're in a rut and maybe your casting is getting a little bit stale, maybe you're not making the kind of presentations that you want to make, it's something as simple as using a different fly rod can change the way that you approach how you're fishing. I think to use a significant, almost like hyperbolic example, if you're using a 9-foot 5 weight that's made out of graphite, switch up to a 7.5-foot 4 weight that's made out of fiberglass. All right. There's a good chance that you have rods like that in your arsenal. But if you've been fishing the same river and you're kind of getting frustrated at how you're presenting flies, you're kind of getting frustrated that you're not having the kind of success that you'd like to have, you feel like you kind of dropped off in your ability to present flies and to catch fish and to hook up and things like that, then switch things up. And all of a sudden, you are engaging your muscles and you're engaging the way that you're approaching that water in a different way, a way that's different enough that you're going to be paying attention to things in a new way. Another example. There was a river that had some great hatches coming off. And I was fishing with a 9-foot 5-weight, relatively fast action graphite rod, and the casts were on point. I was able to make every cast, and it was going just perfectly. I was having such a good time putting the flies where they needed to be, and the fish were responding appropriately. And for hours after hour after hour, I was missing fish, or I was catching fish and I was snapping them off. And this happened for a few days. And I was just basically banging my head against the wall because I was doing the same thing over and over again. Very little success rate as far as getting fish to the net. So stopped, went back to the car. Actually, I think I fished streamers for a while just because I was like, I'm going to do something totally different. But I knew that fishing those dry flies and fishing to those fish was the way to go. And I precisely did what I mentioned earlier. I switched up for a rod that is not an ideal dry fly rod. It was a shorter rod. It was a fiberglass rod. I was still able to make those casts, not with the same kind of precision that I was making with that longer, stiffer rod. But now I was using a softer rod that I had to think about my cast a lot more. And so my mind was almost preoccupied with making the cast. And so my fishing went into autopilot when it came to setting the hook. And I was doing things subconsciously that I just knew to do. I wasn't stressed about it. I wasn't focused about it. And then from a very practical standpoint, having that fiberglass rod was a great way to keep those fish on. The fish, I was just losing more fish than I remember losing in a long time, or having fish throw the hook when they jump. And so going to a slower rod, something that was able to suppress the tension that was being created in some of these harder runs and some of these jumps, it was a great way to keep more fish on and bring more fish to hand. So that was kind of a mini rut that I got stuck in for a few hours for a couple of days. And I was able to break out of it by just switching up my gear. And in doing so, I approached the water a different way. I thought about things in a different way. The gear was helpful on its own, but it also was helpful in it changed the way that I was thinking about and dealing with that situation that had become difficult to me, to a certain degree because of my own frustration, but also because of the gear that I was using. All right. So the first suggestion, breaking out of rut, has to do with just putting things down, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I keep coming back to this because I think it's important. Because you can fish 12 months out of the year, 365 days in a lot of places, doesn't mean you have to. And it doesn't make you less of an angler if you don't. All right. That's the first thing. The second thing is switch up your gear. Just try something different. Try a different rod. This can even kind of trickle down all the way to try different flies. This is a more anecdote-filled podcast than most, but there was one season where opening day was rolling around. Again, opening day is just kind of a general term for the thrust of fishing season, because a lot of these catch and release areas you can fish year round. But opening day was rolling around. I just didn't have the same sort of kind of enthusiasm or or pop that I had in previous years. I just kind of felt like it was going to be more of the same for some of these rivers that I'd been fishing for a long time. And I was excited about catching fish. I was just not excited about how I was going to be catching fish. So I made the goal of just becoming a better angler with nymphs. And it became a challenge. And so this is almost like a second piece of advice of switching up your gear, and third piece of advice, which is set goals. Setting goals can be a great way to break out of a rut. It can be almost like creating a challenge for yourself. So the challenge is, even if there's bugs coming off and I could catch fish on dry flies, continue to use nymphs. Or there might not be any fish that are coming up, but fish attractors, fish terrestrials, and try to entice fish or target fish or locate fish that are coming up. So you're switching up your gear. You're in the sense that normally I'd fish fly X, but here I'm fishing fly Y, and I'm having to think differently. I'm having to read the water differently. I'm having to cast differently. I'm having to fish differently. And so that's kind of the second option. Then the third option is set goals for yourself. Setting goals for yourself is a great way to up the ante when it comes to challenge on the river. So again, and as I've said, and many other wiser and more experienced anglers than I have said over the years, we don't fly fish because it's the easiest way to fish. We enjoy fishing in a way that has a certain rhythm to it, but also brings with it a certain amount of challenge. And so adding another challenge to it isn't that incongruent from what you're already doing. You're already engaging with the water and with the fish in a way that is particular because you enjoy it. There's, of course, places where you have to fly fish because of regulations, but there's a very good chance that if you are a committed fly fisher, then you are fly fishing because you enjoy it and you enjoy the way that kind of fishing works and also the challenge that accompanies it. So what's wrong with adding other challenges? So whether it be I want to catch fish with this fly or this style of fly, I want to catch fish in this particular river, I want to catch fish over a certain amount of time, I want to catch a number of fish, I want to catch a size of fish, I want to catch a species of fish, I want to catch a fish utilizing these techniques. I'm going to buy a Euro nymphing rod and I'm going to fish that Euro nymphing rod. I'm going to make a bamboo rod and I'm going to catch a trout every month of the season on the bamboo rod that I built. Whatever that challenge may be, it adds a certain something. Now, this might be the absolute last thing you want to do. The absolute last thing you want to do, it might be add some sort of challenge or some sort of stipulation to your angling. That might sound terrible, as terrible as potentially putting down fly fishing for a few weeks. But I know for me, there's been times where this has been something that has pushed me on a day or on a week when I really didn't feel like getting out on the water was the best thing to do. There was a challenge that a friend gave some of the fishers in our group a couple years back, which was catch a different species every month out of the year. So if you have a crazy gangbuster like June, where you're catching warm water fish, cold water fish, and up until June, all the way January to June, you've caught a number of species. Then you have a crazy summer month where you catch a ton of fish. You've got some real challenges, and you're fishing for silly little shiners and things like that, or you're going into the salt water and using bait to try to catch just some sort of random fish. But this was the challenge. It was catch a different species every month. So if you catch, again, 2 species in May, now you can't catch that species again for the rest of the year. Totally arbitrary. There was no award. There's nothing like that. It was just a fun little challenge for us to do and to talk about what we had caught, what we hadn't caught, how we had fished for it, what kind of things we did to try to find new fish and the silly fish that we got ourselves into. And so there was a couple of months where I was just like, I didn't want to go fish for trout in the heat of the summer, but I thought, you know what? There's probably some ponds I could go to up here in New England and find some weird little fish, a hornpout. How many of you know what a hornpout is? And try to catch a hornpout with a fly. And that's precisely what I did. And it was just kind of a different, kind of sideways way of going fishing, but it was a way to get out on the water, and it was a way to kind of get those fishing gears lubricated as I went through a hot summer here in New England. All right. So maybe this has been helpful. Maybe this sounds like the craziest thing in the world because you have no problem getting up and getting out for fly fishing. But I know from my own experience and from people I have fished with and from different folks that have talked about, their fishing experience here on Casting Across, uh, that there are times where you might just need a little bit of a boost, a little bit of a recharge, a little bit of a reset for your time out on the water. So hopefully these three things can get you out of that rut. Maybe you're frustrated because of your inability to catch fish or catch fish that you would want to catch, or maybe you just don't have that same joy and passion that you've had. Hopefully, these three things can give you some good ideas, and some of my experiences can kind of give it some real world teeth as it relates to getting out there and actually making these things work. Have you had a similar experience? I'd be happy to hear about that, and it might be something that the entire audience would be happy to hear about as well. Matthew at castingacross.com. Once again, I'll respond to you regardless, but it might make it on the podcast here in a few weeks. So this week on the podcast, 2 articles. The first one was called 3 Trout Box Staples for Panfish. 3 Trout Box Staples for Panfish. Now, this was a kind of a fun article to write. And the impetus for this came from a recent trip where I thought I was going to be fishing for trout. I ended up not fishing for trout. I ended up fishing for warm water fish the entire time. Caught some really good bass, and then I saw some really big panfish. And as fun as big bass are, I am a sucker for big panfish. I think pound for pound, I'd rather catch a 12-inch sunfish than a 12-inch bass, a 12-inch trout, probably more than like a 14 or 16-inch trout for that matter. And so I really wanted to target these fish, but I did not bring a box of panfish flies, say that 3 times fast, with me. So what did I do? I didn't turn to the local sporting goods store because they actually didn't have any flies. What I did was I got my trout flies out, and I thought, what flies in this box are going to perform well for panfish? Now, on one sense, all of them. They're all going to work. I mean, with very few exceptions, you're able to use most trout flies to entice a panfish. But there's some that are going to work well, some that are going to work better than others, I should say. And so I talk about 3 of those patterns and why I choose them. And to the point that actually these flies are flies that live in my trout box, but there's also flies that these exact same flies that are in my panfish box. And for anyone who has chased not just panfish, in a general sense, but chased large panfish, big bluebill, big sunfish, big pumpkin seed, even big crappie, you understand that it's not as easy as throwing a worm in, but it might be as easy as throwing a squirmy wormy in. So check out what those 3 flies are and in that article. And the next article is called Excel at Keeping Fly Fishing Records. All right, this might be the nerdiest article ever on Casting Across, and it really demonstrates my kind of obsessive nature when it comes to certain aspects of record keeping. But I like to keep a lot of records about a lot of things, so I'm never second guessing myself or questioning what something is. So I have spreadsheets about fly fishing. Well, actually, these days with Excel, it's one spreadsheet with multiple tabs about fly fishing. And I talk about some of the different tabs that I have on this article, but the one that I think is really helpful and really beneficial, and the one that I turn to more often than not, and one that may be helpful for you if you have a wide assortment of reels and a wide assortment of lines, is a spreadsheet keeping track of what fly line is on which reel, when you bought it, and some other specs about that fly line. These days you can see the specs of fly lines on a lot of the nicer brands models. They will, little print what the weight is, what the taper is, and some other information on there. But sometimes that is rolled up under a couple of coils of line and a whole leader, and so you can't easily see that. Sometimes if you have a whole drawer full of spools and reels like I do, it's not the easiest thing to just kind of go through one by one. So all I do is when I buy a fly line, I put it in the spreadsheet. When I put it on a reel, I make a note of that, and now I know exactly what line is on which spool. And I also know when I started using that line. And that's helpful too, because I talk about this all the time. Fly line is super important. It makes a good rod better. It makes a great rod the best. And it's the biggest thing that is going to influence your casting outside of your skill. And to have clean and well-maintained fly line matters so much. And so I want to spend my hard-earned money on fly line that's going to last a long time. So part of the benefit of this spreadsheet is that I'm able to say, wow, after a couple seasons, this one's really cracking prematurely. I mean, I cleaned it, I took care of it, I didn't fish anywhere gross, and I'm not going to patronize this brand again. Or if I do, I'm going to wait until they say that they've got a new and improved version of their fly line. And it also can make me say, you know what, this particular brand, this persisted year after year after year. I've gotten a ridiculously long life out of this line because I put it on all these years ago and it's still performing well. And then you get to the situation where, you've thrown away the spool or something like that, and you've got I know I've got a couple of lines that are wrapped around water bottles downstairs, and so there's no way to label them without just creating some sort of system, and I've done that on my spreadsheet. So just a couple other thoughts along my crazy line management system that I mentioned just now in this article, Excel at Keeping Fly Fishing Records. This week's recommendation on the podcast is actually a sneak peek of a full review that is coming probably within the next few weeks. But over the last month, I have been fishing with the Qualifly reels Impact, their 6 to 8 weight model. The Impact is a new reel that they have released just this year, and it is a stellar reel that is useful in fighting larger fish in the freshwater and saltwater fish. Incredibly smooth in pulling line out, and a great drag and a wonderful retrieve. This thing is rock solid and incredibly light, well balanced, and very, very sharp to look at. So this comes in at just a touch over 7.5 ounces for their 6 to 8 weight, and I'm using it on an 8 weight rig. I haven't spooled it up with 6 weight line and given a shot in that context, but I've been fishing for some larger freshwater fish and in the salt with it, so I've been using it on an 8 weight, and it is an excellent reel to this point. It also has a sealed drag, and you pop the thing open, and it doesn't just say it's sealed, and you can see where you question this. This thing is built rock solid, both from the exterior with its aggressive space and weight saving design, all the way to just the way that the thing's assembled. So I've really enjoyed using it. Nice big bulky drag knob, easy to switch around. I have no need to switch it, but I did play with the mechanism that's used to switch it, the retrieve. But it's great little reel from a great company with a really cool story. I actually talked to the owners of Qualifly maybe early 2022 about their company. So that's over at Casting Across. But I'll put a link to the Qualifly Reels Impact on this podcast's notes over at castingacross.com. And like I said, look for a full review over at Casting Across, which I'll certainly mention coming up sometime in the next month. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and then rate the podcast in iTunes. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.
A life that has the stories to back it. A life to be proud of. It's a Winchester life.
Yeah, baby. 6'8" Western. Oh, mule deer, baby, right there.
Tune in every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV.